My parents humiliated me at my own graduation, publicly praising my sister while mocking my struggles. They had no idea I was the anonymous benefactor keeping them out of bankruptcy. So, I cut the financial cord forever. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. My head was pounding with a rhythmic, sickening thud that matched the bass of the rented speakers in my parents' backyard. I stood near the edge of the patio, gripping a plastic cup of lukewarm sparkling cider so tightly that the sides were beginning to crack under the pressure of my fingers. I was running on perhaps 3 hours of sleep, a dangerous deficit that had become my normal over the last 4 years. Between working 80-hour weeks as a corporate restructuring consultant and quietly clawing my way through my advanced degree at night, my body felt like a fragile shell held together by caffeine and sheer, stubborn willpower. Today was supposed to be the finish line. Today was my graduation party. Or, at least, the banner hanging limply between the 2 oak trees said, "Congratulations." It didn't specify a name. I should have known then. I should have seen the warning signs in the cheap paper plates, and the fact that my mother, Linda, had refused to let me invite any of my own colleagues from the firm. Attention! Attention, everyone! Gather around. My father, Robert, tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, piercing rings cut through the chatter of our extended family and neighbors. He stood at the head of the patio, his face flushed with the kind of jovial pride I had spent my entire life trying to earn. Beside him stood my younger sister, Ruby. Ruby, at 24, was a vision of relaxed elegance. She had a fresh blowout, a designer sundress that I knew for a fact cost more than my first car, and a serene, unbothered smile that only comes from a life completely devoid of real hardship. "I want to make a toast," my father boomed, his voice echoing across the manicured lawn, a lawn that, unbeknownst to him, I had literally paid to keep from going into foreclosure. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my trembling legs. Here it comes, I thought. Just a simple "good job, Anna. That's all I need." "We are all here today to celebrate a momentous occasion," my father continued, placing a heavy, affectionate hand on Ruby's shoulder. "As you know, our family has always valued hard work. We have always valued ambition. And today, we are incredibly proud to announce that our youngest, Ruby, has officially accepted a position as a junior social media coordinator at a major downtown agency." The crowd erupted into applause. My stomach plummeted, twisting into a tight, agonizing knot. A wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to lean against the wooden railing of the deck to stay upright. "Let's celebrate the real success," my father declared, raising his glass high into the afternoon sun. "Your sister's new job." I stared at him, my vision blurring at the edges. The real success. I had just graduated at the top of my class with a master's degree while working a grueling corporate job. I had sacrificed my 20s, my health, and my peace of mind. But to them, Ruby's entry-level job, a job my aunt had practically begged a friend to give her, was the only triumph worth mentioning. I looked at my mother. Linda stood on the other side of Ruby, beaming with radiant joy. She caught my eye for a fraction of a second, and I waited for her to step in, to mention the degree, to say anything about the actual reason this party was supposedly planned. Instead, she just nodded in fierce agreement with my father, raising her own glass to Ruby. And then I heard it. A low, raspy whisper from just a few feet away. It was Aunt Bella, leaning into the ear of a neighbor. "At least she earned it," Bella hissed, her eyes darting maliciously in my direction. "Anna's just been dragging her feet in school forever. It's embarrassing, really." I stopped breathing. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all faded into a dull, underwater hum. My chest tightened painfully, restricting the air from my lungs. I had given them everything. I had hollowed myself out to keep this family afloat, and they were standing there, completely oblivious, celebrating my sister while treating me like a pathetic failure. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The applause slowly died down, replaced by the excited hum of congratulations directed entirely at Ruby. Relatives surged forward to hug her, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of praise. I remained frozen against the deck railing, my plastic cup now completely crushed in my hand, the lukewarm cider dripping sticky and sweet over my knuckles. No one looked at me. No one approached me. I was a ghost at my own supposed celebration. The physical toll of the last 4 years suddenly crashed down on me with unbearable weight. My vision swam with dark spots, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I needed to get away from the noise, away from the blinding sun, and away from the sight of my father proudly patting Ruby's back. I pushed my way through the sliding glass doors and stepped into the cool, quiet sanctuary of the kitchen. I leaned against the marble countertop, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes, trying desperately to hold back the tears of sheer, unadulterated humiliation. I took deep, shuddering breaths, focusing on the hum of the refrigerator. "Well, don't you look miserable?" I snapped my head up. My mother, Linda, stood in the doorway, holding an empty tray of appetizers. Her expression was one of mild annoyance, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. She walked over to the sink, dropping the tray with a loud clatter that made me flinch. "Mom," I managed to say, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Mom, what was that out there? Dad didn't even mention my degree. He said Ruby's job was the real success. At a party that was supposed to be for my graduation." Linda sighed, a long, exaggerated sound that conveyed her profound exhaustion with my very existence. She didn't look at me, instead focusing her attention on aggressively wiping down an already clean section of the counter. "Oh, Anna, please don't start this right now," she muttered, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are always so dramatic. It's not a competition." "Not a competition." I echoed, the disbelief forcing a bitter laugh from my throat. "Mom, I worked myself into the ground for this degree. I barely slept. I missed holidays. And you didn't even put my name on the banner outside." She finally stopped wiping and turned to face me. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any maternal warmth or understanding. "Look, Anna," she said sharply, "you've been in school for years, taking your sweet time. Ruby went out and got a real job in the real world. She's making something of herself. Your father just wanted to make sure she felt supported, since you're always making everything about your stress and your studies." "My stress," I whispered, taking a step back as if she had physically struck me. "You think I was taking my time. You think I enjoyed working day and night. I think you need to stop being so jealous of your sister," Linda snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "It's ugly, Anna, it really is. Now wash your face and come back outside. People are starting to ask why you're sulking in here while we're trying to celebrate." She turned on her heel and marched out of the kitchen, the swinging door shutting behind her with a definitive thud. I stood alone in the silence, the sheer magnitude of their delusions suffocating me. They genuinely believed I was a lazy, jealous failure. They looked at my exhaustion and saw incompetence. They looked at my modest lifestyle and saw a lack of ambition. I walked over to the kitchen window and peered through the blinds. Outside, my father was laughing uproariously at something Aunt Bella had said, while Ruby posed for photos with her new colleagues. They were so confident in their reality. They were so secure in their beautiful house, their manicured lawn, and their comfortable lives. As my mother returned to the patio, handing Ruby a fresh glass of champagne, a strange, terrifying calm washed over the panic in my chest. My tears dried up instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. They thought they held all the cards. They thought they had me perfectly figured out. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the sheer magnitude of their blindness, you have to understand exactly what I had sacrificed over the last 4 years. When I was 24, just starting out in the grueling world of corporate strategy, I accidentally intercepted a piece of mail at my parents' house. It was a final notice of foreclosure. My parents, desperate to maintain their wealthy, country club image, had secretly drowned themselves in a toxic ocean of credit card debt, taking out multiple disastrous secondary loans against their home. They were 90 days away from losing everything: the house, the cars, their entire carefully curated reputation. I didn't confront them. I knew my father's pride would shatter, and my mother would spiral into a nervous breakdown. Instead, I quietly leveraged every single skill I had learned in my corporate job. I lived in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment, ate rice and beans, and funneled every spare dime of my six-figure salary into a meticulously structured, anonymous LLC named Apex Holdings. Through a series of highly complex, confidential legal maneuvers orchestrated by a lawyer I hired, Apex Holdings bought their debt, restructured their mortgage, and began silently paying off the arrears. My parents received a formal letter from their bank stating that an independent investment firm had acquired their debt and provided a deeply forgiving restructuring plan. They never questioned it. They just assumed it was a stroke of miraculous luck, a reward from the universe for being such wonderful people. They went right back to buying designer clothes for Ruby and hosting lavish parties, completely unaware that their eldest daughter was literally starving herself to keep the roof over their heads. I watched the party continue through the kitchen window, my eyes eventually locking onto the true architect of my family's financial delusions: Aunt Bella. Aunt Bella was my father's older sister, a woman who possessed a terrifyingly polished exterior that completely masked her hollow interior. She wore a tailored linen suit that screamed old money, and her neck was draped in thick, gold chains. She claimed to be an independent wealth management consultant, a vague, impressive-sounding title that, as far as I could tell, involved absolutely no actual wealth or management. Bella thrived on chaos and superiority. She was the one who constantly fed my parents' egos, convincing them that they deserved luxury, pushing them to take vacations they couldn't afford, and relentlessly whispering poison into their ears about me. I watched her now as she cornered my father near the grill. Even from a distance, I could read the predatory tilt of her head. I decided I couldn't hide in the kitchen forever. I pushed the door open and stepped back into the heat, navigating the edges of the crowd. As I passed the grill, Bella's shrill, overly articulated voice drifted over to me. "Robert, darling, I'm just saying, it's time to start thinking about the future," Bella was saying, swirling the ice in her drink. "With Ruby launching her career so successfully, she's going to need a proper space. This house is so large, and let's face it, Anna isn't exactly moving up in the world. Have you considered looking into a reverse mortgage, or perhaps transferring the deed into a trust that favors Ruby? You must protect your assets from dead weight." My father nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in deep, serious thought, as if Bella was dispensing brilliant financial gospel. "You might be right, Bella. Anna is she's struggling. She doesn't have the drive Ruby does. We do need to protect what we've built." "What you've built," I thought, a bitter, hysterical laugh threatening to bubble up my throat. "You've built a house of cards on my broken back." Bella turned her head, her sharp, heavily mascaraed eyes locking onto me. A wide, entirely fake smile stretched across her face. "Anna, dear," she called out loudly, ensuring several guests turned to look. "We were just talking about you. Have you finally finished those little classes of yours? Are you ready to get a real job and move out of that dreadful, tiny apartment? Ruby was just telling me how embarrassing it is when her friends ask where her older sister lives." I stopped walking. I looked at Bella's smug, powdered face. I looked at my father, who was pointedly looking away from me, embarrassed by my very presence. I looked across the yard at my mother and Ruby, laughing together, clinking glasses, celebrating their perfect, fake lives. The devoted, terrified daughter inside of me finally, permanently died. I didn't respond to Bella's taunt. I just offered her a slow, terrifyingly calm smile, turned on my heel, and walked straight out of the backyard, leaving my own graduation party behind. The time for silent suffering was over. The drive back to my tiny, cramped apartment was entirely silent. I did not turn on the radio. I did not cry. The crushing, suffocating weight of my family's disdain, which I had carried on my shoulders for 4 agonizing years, had simply evaporated in the afternoon heat. In its place was a sharp, brilliant, and terrifyingly cold clarity. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to my unit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the scuffed linoleum, unlocked my door, and stepped into the dim, sparse room I had forced myself to call home. I tossed my keys onto the chipped Formica counter. I walked straight to my small desk in the corner, pulled out my securely encrypted laptop, and opened it. The screen bathed my face in a pale blue light as I bypassed the dual-factor authentication and logged into the secure server of my legal representation. For years, I had been the passive victim of my own misplaced loyalty. I had convinced myself that keeping them afloat was my duty as a daughter. I had watched them mock my modest lifestyle, completely unaware that the only reason they weren't sleeping in a shelter was because I was quietly routing 60% of my senior analyst salary into a corporate entity. I clicked on the folder labeled Apex Holdings LLC. There it was, the master ledger. Line by line, month by month, I scrolled through the massive, crippling mortgage payments I had made on their behalf. I scrolled past the thousands of dollars I had quietly paid to settle their absurd credit card debts, the charges from designer boutiques, 5-star restaurants, and luxury car leases. They believed a benevolent investment firm had taken pity on them, restructuring their debt into a manageable, interest-free dream. They had no idea that I was Apex Holdings. I was the sole managing member. I owned their debt. And then I opened the subfolder. Inside rested the scanned, legally binding deed to their beloved lakeside vacation cabin. 2 years ago, when the secondary creditors were circling like vultures, my parents had been completely desperate. To hide their only unencumbered asset from being seized, they had eagerly followed the advice of Apex Holdings to transfer the deed of the cabin into the LLC's name for safekeeping. They had literally signed their favorite vacation property over to me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the digital signature of my father, Robert. He had signed it with a flourish, believing he was outsmarting the system. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Ruby. "Mom says you left early." Typical. "You always have to ruin my special days. Aunt Bella says you're just intimidated by my success. Grow up." I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. Marcus was a former forensic accountant turned private investigator whom I had used during my initial restructuring of my parents' mess. He was expensive, discreet, and devastatingly thorough. "Anna," Marcus replied, sounding mildly surprised. "It's been a while. The Apex accounts are running smoothly. What do you need?" "I need a deep, exhaustive dive into an individual," I instructed, pulling up a blank document on my screen to take notes. "Her name is Bella. She goes by Aunt Bella to me, but her legal name is Isabella. She claims to be an independent wealth management consultant. She operates locally, mostly catering to older, country club demographics. I want to know everything. I want her licensing history, her credit score, her actual net worth, and any civil or criminal litigation she's been involved in over the last 2 decades. Marcus paused, the sound of a keyboard clacking softly in the background. "You think she's a problem?" "She is actively trying to convince my father to take out a reverse mortgage and transfer the equity of his primary residence into a trust," I explained, my grip tightening on the phone. "A trust that I guarantee she intends to manage or control. She's trying to drain whatever imaginary equity she thinks they have left." "I'll have a preliminary dossier by Tuesday," Marcus promised, his tone shifting into pure professionalism. "And Anna, if she's pushing a reverse mortgage without proper affiliation, she's leaving a paper trail. I'll find it." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked around my small, cheap apartment. I had lived in poverty to save them. Now it was time to let the castle fall. Tuesday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity that mirrored the tension knotting in my stomach. My mother had summoned the family for a celebratory dinner to commemorate Ruby's survival of her first 3 days at her new job. I hadn't been invited naturally, but I showed up anyway. When I walked through the heavy mahogany front doors of my parents' house, The scent of expensive catered salmon and roasted asparagus wafted through the hallway. I stepped into the formal dining room. My father sat at the head of the long oak table, pouring a generous glass of red wine. Ruby was across from him, scrolling mindlessly on her phone. And there, sitting to my father's right in a place of honor, was Aunt Bella. "Anna," my mother said, freezing with a silver serving tongs in her hand. We didn't think you were coming. You're usually too busy studying or working your little job to join us for family meals." "I made time," I said smoothly, pulling out a heavy, upholstered chair opposite Bella and sitting down. I placed my handbag carefully on the floor beside me. Inside it rested a thick, manila envelope Marcus had messaged to my secure courier that very afternoon. Bella offered me a tight, condescending smile. "How lovely. Did you finally decide to come and apologize to your sister for your dreadful behavior at the party? Running away like a pouting child is terribly unbecoming for a woman of your age." "I'm not here to apologize to anyone, Bella," I replied, keeping my voice entirely level. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. My father sighed loudly, slamming his wine glass onto the table. "Anna, please, we are having a nice evening. Bella was just explaining the benefits of the new trust structure to us. She's going to help us maximize Ruby's inheritance and protect our assets." "Is she?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the pristine white tablecloth. "That's fascinating. Tell me, Bella, what kind of trust are you recommending? A revocable living trust, an irrevocable asset protection trust, and who exactly is the named trustee?" Bella stiffened. Her heavily powdered face seemed to crack ever so slightly under the bright chandelier light. "That is highly confidential financial strategy, Anna. It is far too complex for you to understand, and quite frankly, it is none of your business. I am dealing directly with Robert." "It's my family's home, so I consider it my business," I countered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't blink. I just stared directly into her defensive, shifting eyes. "But I am curious about one small detail. Since you are providing such high-level, complex financial advice, I decided to look you up in the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority database, the FINRA broker check system." The dining room went completely silent. Ruby finally looked up from her phone, her brow furrowed in confusion. My mother lowered the serving tongs. "I couldn't find you, Bella," I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I searched for your name. I searched for your supposed consulting firm. There is no record of you holding a Series 7, a Series 65, or any valid license to provide financial advisory services in this state. So I have to ask, how exactly are you operating?" Bella's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. She slammed her hand flat against the table, rattling the silverware. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her carefully cultivated accent slipping into something sharp and frantic. "I operate as an independent, private consultant. I deal exclusively with ultra-high-net-worth individuals through private networks. We do not require government oversight or public databases. I rely on discretion, something you clearly know nothing about." "Private networks," I repeated, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. "Is that what you call it?" "Robert, are you going to let her speak to me this way?" Bella demanded, turning to my father with wide, theatrical eyes. "In your own home, after everything I am trying to do for this family." My father stood up, his face purple with outrage. "Anna, that is enough. You come into this house, uninvited, and immediately start interrogating your aunt. She is a respected professional. You are way out of line. Apologize immediately or leave." "I won't apologize for asking a basic question, Dad," I said calmly, "but I will leave." I stood up, grabbing my handbag from the floor. I looked at Bella, whose chest was heaving with manufactured indignation. "Just make sure you read the fine print before you sign anything, Dad," I said quietly, "if you even have the equity left to sign away." I walked out of the dining room, leaving a heavy, poisoned silence in my wake. The first crack in Bella's armor had been made. Now, it was time to tear the whole suit off. The next 3 days were a masterclass in frantic manipulation. My phone blew up with furious texts from my mother, demanding I beg Bella for forgiveness. Ruby left a voicemail accusing me of being obsessively jealous and trying to ruin her financial future. According to my family, Bella was so deeply offended by my unhinged accusations that she was threatening to withdraw her valuable services entirely, leaving them financially vulnerable. They were panicking, clinging tighter to the very woman who was trying to sink them. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment, meticulously reviewing the massive physical file Marcus had delivered. The extent of Bella's deception was staggering. It wasn't just that she lacked a license, she was an active, predatory fraud. The documents detailed a history of absolute financial ruin. Isabella had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy twice in the last 15 years. Her credit score was practically non-existent, but the most damning piece of evidence was a civil court judgment from 3 years ago. Bella had convinced an elderly, widowed neighbor to grant her power of attorney under the guise of wealth management. Within 6 months, Bella had drained the woman's savings to fund her own country club lifestyle. The family had sued, won a judgment of over $200,000, but Bella had hidden her assets so thoroughly they had never collected a dime. She was broke, desperate, and trying to execute the exact same con on my gullible, image-obsessed parents. On Thursday evening, a sharp, aggressive knock rattled my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. It was my father and my mother. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. My mother stepped inside, her nose immediately wrinkling in disgust as she took in the worn carpeting and the thrift store furniture. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and intense irritation. "Anna, this has gone far enough," my father began, his voice hard and uncompromising. He didn't even bother to take off his coat. "Bella is devastated. She was in tears yesterday. She is family, Anna. She is trying to help us secure Ruby's future, and you insulted her out of sheer spite. We will not tolerate this behavior. You are going to call her right now, with us present, and you are going to apologize." "I am not calling her Dad," I said, walking over to my small dining table. The thick manila folder sat in the center, waiting. And she wasn't in tears because she was insulted. She was in tears because she realized I'm actually looking into her. "Stop it," my mother snapped, stepping forward. "Just stop. Why must you ruin everything? Why can't you just be happy for your sister and grateful for your aunt's help?" "Grateful?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You want me to be grateful? Fine, come here, both of you, look at this." I opened the manila folder and spread the documents across the table. I picked up the thickest packet, the civil court judgment, and held it out to my father. "What is this nonsense, Anna?" he demanded, refusing to take it. "It's a court order, Dad," I said, my hand not wavering. "From 3 years ago. When your respected, professional sister drained the life savings of an 82-year-old widow in a neighboring county. The family sued her for fraud. They won. She owes them $200,000. My father froze. His eyes flicked down to the paper, then back up to my face. "You're lying, you manufactured this." "It has the county clerk's official seal stamped right on the front," I told him, dropping it onto the table and picking up the next document. "Here are her 2 separate bankruptcy filings. The most recent one was discharged only 4 years ago. She has no assets, Dad. She has no license. She has no private network. She lives entirely off high-interest credit cards and whatever she can siphon from gullible people who trust her." My mother let out a small, trembling gasp. She reached out with a shaking hand and pulled the bankruptcy filing toward her. She read the first page, her face draining of color. "Robert," she whispered. "Robert, it has her social security number on it, her old address." "It's fake, Linda," my father insisted, his voice rising in panic, but he leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the court judgment. I watched the absolute certainty in his posture begin to crack and splinter. He was a proud man, a stubborn man, but he was looking at irrefutable, state-certified proof that his sister was a con artist. "She wanted you to sign the house into a trust, didn't she?" I pushed, stepping closer to them. "She wanted to be the trustee. She wanted the power to borrow against whatever equity you have left so she could pay off her own debts. She was going to bankrupt you. She wouldn't, my father whispered, though the fight had completely left his voice. He dropped into one of my cheap dining chairs, staring blankly at the papers. She's my sister. She wouldn't do that to us. We need her help, Anna. You don't understand our situation. I understand a lot more than you think I do, I said quietly, gathering the papers back into a neat pile. I had shown them the truth about Bella. Now they were finally primed to hear the truth about me. Tomorrow is Ruby's big celebration dinner, I said, looking down at my devastated parents. The one at the country club. Bella will be there. I will be there too. And I suggest you don't sign a single piece of paper until I have my final say. The drive to the Oak Ridge Country Club was a familiar route, one I had taken countless times in my youth when my parents were still pretending their wealth was infinite. The heavy iron gates loomed in the twilight, flanked by meticulously manicured hedges that smelled of damp earth and expensive fertilizer. I handed my keys to the valet, a young man who looked entirely too exhausted for his age, and walked up the grand, sweeping stone steps. The oppressive humidity of the evening clung to my skin, but inside, the clubhouse was an oasis of aggressive air conditioning, and the soft, ambient hum of string quartet music piped through hidden speakers. I paused in the grand foyer, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. I adjusted the strap of my simple leather shoulder bag, feeling the heavy weight of the manila envelope resting securely inside. Tonight was the night the illusion shattered. I navigated the plush, velvet-lined hallways until I reached the private dining alcove my mother had reserved for Ruby's celebratory dinner. The room was enclosed by heavy glass doors, offering a full view of the lavish setup inside while keeping the conversation fiercely private. Through the glass, I could see the scene unfolding perfectly. The table was set with the club's finest china and crystal. My father, Robert, sat at the head of the table, looking incredibly tense, his hands folded tightly in front of him. My mother, Linda, was fidgeting with her linen napkin, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Ruby was, as usual, taking selfies in the flattering, dim lighting. And then there was Aunt Bella. She sat directly to my father's right, practically vibrating with predatory excitement. Spread out on the table in front of them were several thick, legally bound documents, flagged with brightly colored sticky notes. Bella was holding a heavy gold pen, gesturing animatedly toward my father, her mouth moving in a rapid, persuasive rhythm. She was going in for the kill. I pushed open the heavy glass doors. The soft click of the latch was immediately drowned out by Bella's sharp voice. And once your signature is on this final page, Robert, the transfer is complete. The trust will be officially established, shielding your primary residence from any unforeseen liabilities and granting me the executive authority to manage the equity for Ruby's future. It is the absolute smartest, safest maneuver you can make in this economic climate. He isn't signing anything, Bella, I announced. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a physical blade. All four heads snapped in my direction. My father's face immediately drained of whatever remaining color it had, a profound look of guilt and terror washing over his features. He remembered the documents I had shown him the night before. Bella's head swiveled toward me, her heavily powdered face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The gold pen slipped from her grasp, clattering loudly against a crystal water goblet. Anna, Bella hissed, standing up so abruptly her heavy oak chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. How did you get in here? This is a private dining reservation. You are not welcome here. Robert, have the staff remove her immediately. My father didn't move. He just stared at the trust documents on the table, his breathing shallow and rapid. I don't need an invitation to stop my family from walking into financial ruin, I said, stepping fully into the room and letting the glass doors swing shut behind me. I walked slowly, deliberately toward the table. Every eye in the room was fixed on me. The ambient music from the hallway seemed miles away. Financial ruin. Bella mocked, letting out a shrill, hysterical laugh. She looked at my mother and Ruby, trying to rally her audience. Listen to her. The girl who lives in a glorified closet and can barely afford her own groceries is trying to give us financial advice. Linda, do you see how unhinged she has become? She is trying to sabotage Ruby's future because she has absolutely nothing going for her own. Mom, Dad, tell her to leave, Ruby whined, finally putting her phone down, her face twisting into a petulant scowl. She's ruining my dinner. She's always ruining everything. Ruby, be quiet, my father suddenly snapped. His voice was thick and raspy, completely devoid of its usual booming authority. Ruby recoiled in shock, her mouth falling open. My father had never, not once in her entire life, spoken to her with that tone. He slowly looked up at me. Anna, the things you showed us yesterday, are you absolutely certain? What things? Bella demanded, her voice dropping an octave as a flicker of genuine panic finally pierced through her arrogant facade. She looked from my father to me, her eyes narrowing into dangerous, calculating slits. What lies have you been feeding them, you jealous, vindictive little girl? I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope. I didn't hand it to my father this time. Instead, I walked right up to Bella's side of the table and slammed the entire stack of documents down right on top of her pristine, perfectly flagged trust papers. I'm not feeding them lies, Isabella, I said, using her full legal name. The sound of it made her physically flinch. I'm feeding them the public record. 2 Chapter 7 bankruptcy discharges, a staggering credit card deficit, and my personal favorite, a $200,000 civil judgment against you for the systematic financial abuse of an 82-year-old widow, a woman who trusted you to manage her wealth, just like my father was about to do. The silence in the dining alcove was absolute, suffocating, and terrifying. Even the clinking of silverware from the main dining room seemed to have ceased. Bella stared at the documents. Her hands began to tremble so violently that her heavy gold bracelets clinked against each other. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She closed it, swallowed hard, and tried again. These are fabricated, she stammered, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at the court seal. This is a deliberate, malicious forgery. I have enemies in the industry. People who want to see my private network fail. Robert, you cannot possibly believe this. This trash. It's not trash, Bella, my father whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out and touched the seal on the civil judgment. I called the county clerk's office this morning. I gave them the docket number. They verified everything. Every single word Anna told me yesterday is true. You have nothing. You are nothing but a thief. Bella's face turned a mottled, terrifying shade of purple. The polished, aristocratic consultant vanished entirely, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. She slammed both hands onto the table, leaning aggressively toward my father. You ungrateful fool. She screamed, spit flying from her lips. I was trying to save you. Look at you, Robert. Look at this charade you are putting on. You sit here in this country club, pretending you are royalty while you are drowning. You are utterly bankrupt. If it wasn't for that anonymous investment firm taking pity on you, you would be living in your car. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with both hands, tears welling up in her eyes. Ruby looked wildly back and forth between her parents and Bella, completely lost. And what were you going to do, Bella? I interrupted, my voice remaining deadly calm despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Were you going to use this trust to take out a high-interest loan against the last remaining equity in their house? Were you going to use it to pay off the civil judgment so you wouldn't face criminal charges? Or were you just going to bleed them dry and disappear? Bella spun on me, her eyes wild with a terrifying, unhinged hatred. You know nothing, you arrogant, pathetic little girl. I am family. I was helping them. Who else was going to help them? You, with your pathetic little salary, you couldn't even afford a proper dress for your own graduation party. They are alive right now because of Apex Holdings. They are surviving because of a miracle they didn't even earn. You have contributed absolutely nothing. I stared at her. I let her words echo around the room, letting the sheer venom of her insults sink into my parents' ears. I watched my mother openly weeping, finally seeing her sister-in-law for the monster she truly was. Then, I reached back into my leather bag. You're right about one thing, Bella, I said softly, the quiet volume of my voice forcing everyone in the room to lean in to hear me. They are surviving because of Apex Holdings. I pulled out a second, smaller folder. This one was bound in dark blue leather. I placed it gently on the table, right next to Bella's fraudulent trust documents. I opened the cover. Inside was a single, legally certified sheet of paper. The corporate registration of Apex Holdings, LLC. What is that? My father asked, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. He stared at the blue folder as if it were a bomb about to detonate. I looked him directly in the eyes. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound, exhaustion-laced sorrow. "Dad," I said quietly, "look at the managing member's signature. Look at the sole proprietor." My father slowly stood up. His knees buckled slightly, but he caught himself on the edge of the table. He leaned over, his reading glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose, and focused on the bottom line of the registration document. His breath hitched in his throat. He let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a shock so profound it looked as though his entire reality had just fractured into a million unrecoverable pieces. "Anna," he breathed. "Anna, no, it can't be." "It is," I confirmed, my voice entirely steady. "I am Apex Holdings, Dad. For the last 4 years, I have been working 80 hours a week. I lived in that tiny apartment. I ate rice and beans. I took an extra year to finish my degree. I funneled 60% of my senior analyst salary into that LLC, hired a discreet financial planner, and bought your debt. Every single month when you thought a benevolent bank was saving you, it was me paying your mortgage. It was me paying off the credit cards you used to buy Ruby's designer clothes. It was me." My mother let out a loud, piercing wail, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently with the force of her sobs. Ruby stared at me, her mouth agape, the sheer magnitude of her own entitlement finally crashing down on her. Bella stood frozen, completely paralyzed. The arrogant smirk was permanently wiped from her face, replaced by a look of utter, devastating defeat. The pathetic little girl she had mocked for years was the sole reason she even had a wealthy brother to try and con. "And Bella," I added, turning my gaze back to my aunt, delivering the final, fatal blow. "Remember that vacation cabin you convinced my parents to sign over to the investment firm for safekeeping? You know, the one you were planning to have them sell next to fund your little trust. Yeah. I hold the deed to that too, which means you have absolutely nothing left to steal." I looked around the table. The illusion was gone. The truth was laid bare under the bright chandelier lights. "The dinner is over," I announced, stepping back from the table. "Bella, if you ever contact my parents again, I will personally hand Marcus's entire investigative file over to the district attorney and push for elder abuse charges. Now, get out." Bella did not say a single word. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't look at my father or my mother. The sheer, overwhelming reality of her exposure had completely broken her. She picked up her handbag with trembling, uncoordinated fingers, turned her back on her family, and walked out of the glass doors, disappearing into the plush velvet hallways of the country club. She was a ghost, banished permanently from the lives she had tried to ruin. The silence that followed her departure was heavy and suffocating. I stood at the end of the table, looking at the wreckage of my family. My father sank back into his chair, looking 10 years older than he had when the evening began. He reached out with a shaking hand, tracing the letters of my name on the Apex Holdings registration document. Tears, thick and fast, fell onto the expensive white tablecloth. "Anna," he choked out, his voice broken and hollow. "My God, Anna, what have we done?" My mother rushed around the table, falling to her knees beside my chair. She grabbed my hand, pressing it against her tear-soaked cheek. "We didn't know," she sobbed, her makeup running in dark streaks down her face. "We didn't know, my beautiful girl. We were so blind. We treated you so horribly. We thought you just didn't care. We are so sorry." Even Ruby was crying quietly in her seat, staring down at her lap, unable to meet my eyes. The expensive sundress she wore suddenly looked like a costume she had stolen. "I'm sorry, Anna," she whispered. "I've been so awful to you." I looked down at my mother, feeling the wetness of her tears on my hand. For 4 years, I had fantasized about this exact moment. I had dreamed of the apology, the validation, the desperate plea for my forgiveness. I thought it would feel like a triumphant victory. I thought I would feel powerful. Instead, I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. The secret was out. The burden I had carried alone in the dark was finally set down. "Get up, Mom," I said gently, pulling my hand back but offering her a soft, genuine smile. "Please sit down." She nodded frantically, struggling back into her chair, wiping her eyes with her linen napkin. My father looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he knew he didn't deserve. "I'm not going to cut you off completely," I told them, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not going to let you lose the house, but things are going to change. Drastically. The free ride is over." I sat down in the chair Bella had just vacated, pulling a fresh folder from my bag. It was a strict, unyielding financial plan I had drafted with Marcus the day before. "The Apex Holdings payments are stopping," I explained, sliding the documents across the table. "I have restructured the debt one final time. The mortgage is now in both of your names again, but the monthly payments are strictly your responsibility. You will need to adhere to a rigid, uncompromising budget. The country club membership is being canceled tomorrow. The luxury car leases will be terminated. If you miss a single payment, the bank will proceed with foreclosure, and I will not step in to save you a second time." My father nodded vigorously, not even looking at the strict terms before agreeing. "Yes. Yes, of course, Anna. Anything you say, we will do whatever it takes. We will pay you back every single cent." "You don't owe me the money," I said, shaking my head. "Consider the last 4 years a gift, a very painful, very expensive gift, but you do owe me your respect. You owe me the acknowledgement of what I sacrificed, and you owe it to yourselves to finally live in reality." I looked at Ruby. "And you," I said softly, "you have a job now. It's time to start paying rent. Mom and Dad can't afford to subsidize your lifestyle anymore. It's time to grow up." Ruby swallowed hard, fresh tears welling in her eyes, but she nodded slowly. "I understand. I will." The rest of the evening was spent in quiet, humbling conversation. We didn't eat the expensive catered food. We just sat together, dismantling the toxic, image-obsessed facade that had nearly destroyed us all. For the first time in my entire life, my parents listened to me not as a subordinate, not as a disappointment, but as the strong, capable woman who had literally saved their lives. The healing process was not immediate. It took months of awkward, painful adjustments. My parents struggled immensely to adapt to their new, modest reality. They complained about clipping coupons and driving used cars, but whenever they started to slip into their old, entitled habits, they would look at me, remember the blue leather folder, and stop themselves. Ruby actually thrived under the new pressure, taking her job seriously when she realized she actually had to pay for her own phone bill. As for Bella, she attempted to flee the state, but Marcus's diligent reporting to the State Financial Regulatory Board and the district attorney ensured she didn't get far. She was arrested 3 months later on multiple charges of fraud and elder abuse, finally facing the definitive consequences of her predatory life. 6 months after the confrontation at the country club, I stood on the balcony of my new, spacious apartment, an apartment I could easily afford now that I was no longer secretly funding a mansion. I held a mug of hot coffee, watching the morning sun rise over the city skyline. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was a text from my father. "Just made the final car payment. We are officially on budget this month. Your mother and I are so proud of you, Anna. We love you." I smiled softly, taking a sip of the warm coffee. The air felt lighter. My shoulders, unburdened for the first time in 4 years, finally relaxed. I had survived the betrayal. I had sprung the trap. And in doing so, I hadn't just saved my family's home, I had saved myself. I looked out at the bright, open horizon, knowing that the rest of my life was finally, completely mine.